Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Jonathan Riddell, Artistic Director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance project and delves into new creative territory.
Yes.
Today we're going to we're going to focus on the demo album and on the September 26th rehearsal of Second Story. But first I'd like to share with you a couple of things that occurred leading into today's rehearsal in both categories, starting with the demo album. John, as he predicted in an earlier videocast, at least in one earlier videocast, has been playing a lot with sound mixing, and according to John, the album is sounding better and better and better as a result. So that is very exciting.
Yes.
John and I have also been speaking with industry veterans to get a better idea of how we want to proceed with regard to self-publishing and marketing John's new album. And another thing I thought would be interesting to share are some developments in one song in particular called One Mistake. And John, you were really excited because the changes that you made for One Mistake, in your view, added much more interest, more layers of complexity, and created a sort of musical continuity with the rest of the album. So that left John with two lingering questions that I thought you might want to tell us about, either where you're at on it or that you're still wrestling with them.
Okay.
With regard to One Mistake.
What are your two questions?
Well, one would be which of the two versions that you have now of One Mistake you want to use, both of which John likes very much. And the other is, now that you have played with One Mistake, you were thinking about the order, or really what the final song of the album would be. And there were a couple of considerations here.
Sure. Well, so in terms of the final versions of the song, this song has been very tricky. We've talked about it on other videocasts, because the sort of real core of the song is this, acoustic sound, even though there's a lot of electronic drum beats behind it and supporting it. It really feels like an acoustic guitar song, a singer-songwriter strumming his guitar and singing a sort of a pensive melody. And that's sort of hard to, at least it's been hard for me to negotiate that intimacy and that sound, the actual timbre of the guitar, with the electronic beats, in a way that feels organic, and not sort of tricky or trendy. But truly heartfelt and emotional. And so I've been really wrestling with that for a long time. I did arrive at the notion that the song used to have this huge climactic build, and I used to be singing quite loudly, and again, we've described this before, but I've toned all of that down. I feel it actually works better, staying calm and cool throughout the whole song. But then again, you kind of have to then figure out how everything else supports that. So I think I finally arrived at a version that I do love, and where all of those things do come together well. The song is long compared to at least the other ones, but I feel like if, as long as you're willing to jump on that train with us, then now the train moves smoothly through, and the scenery remains interesting along the ride. Now,
great
the other
imagery.
the other version I'm toying with is in my quest to find that perfect balance. I found this lovely little, I just call it a chime sound, and it's interesting because it has a sort of it's electronic still. It has this little high-pitched little rhythm, da 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 da, but then it also has this sort of a bass version under it. So it has the like high-pitched sound, and then this real a really robotic bass sound, also mimicking that rhythm. So you get this sort of high little song, but with this real wonky wah 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 underneath, and it's kind of a neat balance. And it really sounds lovely amidst all these other instruments I've been playing with, and it harkens me back to an idea that my wife had for the song a long time ago, which was to put bird sounds in the song, which still would be lovely, but I haven't been bold enough to really spend the time investigating what that would be. And considering I have no other sound effects on the album, I figure maybe I shouldn't go there, at least for now. But this little piece of music I could throw in there reminds me of that. And so I created a version that incorporates that sound. It's sort of sprinkled in throughout, and it appears more and more as the song goes on. And I really love it. I think it's really beautiful, and it kind of ties the song into the album as a whole.
Right.
I think even more. Just again, it's another honest in to to that more electronic industrial sound that the rest of the album has. The trick is it does take us just one step away from that quiet, intimate sound that the original version has. So where I'm kind of at right now is I'm debating, like, do I like the version that goes one step closer to the rest of the album, or do I like the version that's one step farther removed but is truly its own unique thing? And that's kind of a hard juggle, because you want the song to be its own beautiful, unique thing, but you also want it to fit into the family. You don't,
Right.
If it's too much of an oddball, then it's like, well, maybe it should be on another album or another collection or a standalone song. Like, does it really fit in with the mix? So that's where I'm at, and I still haven't. I've been since you and I spoke about it. It's been days now that I've been going back and forth and listening to it among both versions, among the other songs, and it's tough. It's tough, and maybe there's a third version that is the perfect blend of the two. I'm not sure, but we'll
it's
see.
interesting as you're saying this, because this is a neat segue into question 2 in terms of the order.
Song order, yeah.
And I wonder if, even if One Mistake becomes the most acoustic version of all the songs in the album, might that then influence your decision to put it last?
Yes, that's been part of it too. Is I've been playing with the song order, and not just with that song and moving that song around, but of course then it affects the balance of everything else. So yeah, I'm trying to. I as I was originally forming this album, I had a clear sense of the order, and that's still there. But I don't know. Also, since I added "So Runs the Beast" into the mix, that kind of throws a delightful monkey wrench into the works. Because it sounds good in so many different places on the album. So it's like, where's that right fit? The good news is in shuffling all these songs around, so many of them sound so good next to so many others that I'm like, oh, we could just put this darn thing on shuffle and it kind of sounds great no matter what.
And there you go.
So yeehaw. So it really is like this, I don't know, the burden of choice that like I have to like, do I have to decide the order really? Do I have? Maybe not. Maybe I should just have someone else come in and do it for me. But yes, to go back to one mistake, having the two versions then also affects that. Like, well, it's kind of neat to then end on this really oddball but intimate note. And at the same time, is that what I want to leave my audience with, or do I want to like rev things back up and
right, almost as bookends with the opening song, which is a real adrenaline rush.
Right.
So
stay tuned. Yes,
we will keep you posted. Also, in this period of time leading up to rehearsal today, John and I have been researching costume and makeup possibilities for the Steffi Nossen showcase performance of Brittle Branches, which led me to think, John, about what factors you weigh when you're thinking about your makeup and costume choices for any particular piece.
What factors do I weigh? It always starts from what the piece is about, and who do I think these characters are. In this case, and of course it's always tricky with more abstract works. It's not like they're literally playing a barber, so you put them in a barber's smock and then you're done. They're representing concepts and ideas and emotions. So things that I consider is, well, how literally human are they? Are they absolutely flesh and blood people? And that's important. And the piece could then work in clothes, or at least things that look like clothing, costumes that look like clothing. Or are they more abstract than that? Are they less literal? In which case you could just put them in colors, just accentuate their bodies. In this case, I'm dealing with images of tree branches, and possibly even the fact that, their stress and anxiety makes their bodies rigid. It makes their nervous system heightened and come alive, and almost like these tree branches are then growing out of their bodies, and they're using their arms and legs like tree branches. Pardon me, I'm just going to tap the screen here for a second. There we go. So there's that. There's these tree images, and then that begs the question: well, are they trees, or are they like tree spirits? Are they, as I described, people with trees growing out of them? Like, what is this? And again, not that you have to arrive at a literal decision, but you do have to, like, you kind of do too if you're designing. Certainly, if I were a professional costume designer, I would think I would at least need to answer a few of those questions. and I'm still kind of wrestling with that, but I feel like in a certain way they kind of represent almost like I think they are people, but it's almost like their souls have stepped out of their bodies, and we're seeing what is going on in their inner world. Almost like they're both in a dream together and interacting in a non-literal world.
Which might suggest a non-literal costume
Right.
and makeup
Right.
choice.
I'm also very inspired right now by the Butoh movement in modern dance, and typically dancers who work in that genre put white generally all over their bodies, so they appear quite ghostly, but also like moving sculpture as well, like moving statues too. Like they almost look marbled, and or sometimes there's variations on that. Perhaps only part of their bodies are white, or they have white but with then other like black lines, black eyes, things like that. It tends to go into the sort of beautiful macabre things, which of course we all know I love. But so that's something I'm very inspired by, and then at the same time I'm trying to ask myself, well, do I want to go fully, just full on into that mode, or do I just want to take like a taste, a hint of it? And today we had a moment to look at some makeup on. We only had a few minutes, but we did try some makeup out on Lori, and we just did like this much of her arm. But it did create a beautiful effect, and as she put it on, she didn't even go all the way to her fingertips, so it kind of then, her fingertips were still fleshy. So you got this nice bleed of color going back into the flesh, and which was something that I asked her to play with, and we're going to continue to play with. But I think I like that idea that it's not the whole body covered. It's we're going to be selective about what parts we use that on.
I think this is definitely going to be a process.
Yeah.
As you test different
Especially
approaches.
Because I'm not a makeup artist and I'm not a costume designer. I design. Sometimes will conceive of the costumes, and sometimes I've had to put things together. But always when I get to work with the costume designer, then they always create something magical and beautiful, and I just try and do my best.
But luckily, this will be a
I
collaborative
think this is
approach.
Right,
though,
but for some pieces, that's fine. You don't want anything too elaborate,
Right,
and
right.
Sometimes what I'm able to conceive of in my head and create myself is just.
Oops, little technical blip, but
Sorry.
actually perfectly timed, because now it's time to move into the September 26th rehearsal. And in the beginning of the rehearsal, we had a nice little treat, because the executive director of Steffi Nossen came in to the studio to show us the poster that Steffi Nossen is going to be using to advertise the Steffi Nossen showcase that Brittle Branches is appearing in. And what picture did they decide to use on this huge poster? One of the beautiful shots of Mandy and Lorena from the Brittle Branches duet in an intimate, moody, gorgeous close-up. So everyone got so excited that we were the ones who were going to be representing this this event, and I think that gave everybody a little extra oomph and determination to make sure that Brittle Branches is its very best.
Yeah,
On
it
show
definitely
day.
made it real for Mandy and Lori. Suddenly they saw a big, nice blow up of the two of them dancing. And it was like, oh, right, this show is actually happening. We're actually in it. Look how good we look in that picture. We need to look at least that good on stage.
Absolutely, and I have no doubt that they will.
Yes,
And
yes, of course.
the hard work you're about to hear about today confirms that everybody was jump starting into this. And once the executive director had left, Lorena and Mandy wanted to listen to the Brittle Branches music first and just kind of get it into their bones from an auditory standpoint. And then they proceeded to mark through the entire piece with Jonathan taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, they felt it would be most beneficial to go over Brittle Branches bit by bit by bit in accordance with Jonathan's notes. And it turned out they made it all the way through the first half of the piece, really focusing on qualitative details. So Jonathan told me how pleased he was that the steps resulted in you having much greater clarity about mood and characterization in the first part of the dance.
Yeah.
So could you flesh that out a bit, John? What exactly became clearer to you through the initial part of the process?
Well, it's interesting because I started off by addressing the very opening of the dance, but using that as an example of a certain sort of technique that I wanted the ladies to use throughout the whole dance, which was focusing on how they're using their hands. There's a lot of gestures where the hands touch your own body or the body of the person next to you, and there's entire conversations where they're touching each other on different parts of their body, primarily with their hands and as well as other parts of their body. But I wanted to move from a place where they were sort of gently placing the hands on each other as into one where they're really pressing into each other, so we actually like see the flesh move. We actually see the fingers and the palm depress into the skin of the other person. That alone creates a whole new texture, a whole new sensuality. And with that, I also wanted them to allow all of the joints of their body to respond. So it's no longer just the bones of the hand, but the wrist settles, the elbow settles, the whole shoulder settles with each touch, as opposed to something very light. These are much more weighted. It's much more the way you would naturally touch someone that you're close to. And I wanted to focus on that and utilize that throughout the entire work. So we looked at, I talked about it at the very beginning, and then said, when in doubt, go in that direction, and let's begin that way and only go deeper with that idea as we move on. Having then said all of that, and seeing them kind of immediately grasp that idea,
Right.
they immediately kind of knew what I was talking about, which was, it again, is always so exciting when you take a big leap like that with dancers and they all are on board and they all get it. Then as the notes progressed and I then talked about, specific moments here and there, or when you move this foot over there at this beat, make it more like this. I don't know, just somehow within me, it all had a greater clarity. It all had greater depth. So in my own mind, in my own heart, starting to talk about that greater nuance, that greater depth, I wanted just made me go into greater depth and nuance in my words, in my in my eye as I'm watching them and noting things. So it's nice. It's sort of like the deeper you go, the deeper you go.
Absolutely. And one of the things I found very interesting as you were descending, shall we say,
Yeah.
deeper and deeper, uh, was a shift in your thinking regarding Lorena's role vis-a-vis Mandy.
Yes, absolutely. That was another very important determination I had made during the hiatus that we took, but also something I wanted to address right away at the top of this rehearsal, now with the intention of going much more deeply into their roles, their characters, their emotional states. As you may recall from previous videocasts, we talked about the two roles the ladies have. One, Mandy's has always been a character who is under great stress, great anxiety. She's perhaps been the victim of something, or just she's at a low point. And Lorena's character acts, at least in the beginning of the dance, as a supportive role to her. She's also a witness to Mandy's pain and to her struggle. And I kind of always thought of Lorena possibly as an angelic figure. But something that occurred to me is that I no longer want to think of her as an angelic figure that's buoyant, that is light, that's sort of, very gracefully reaching her hand down and, quite easily for her lifting Mandy up. I want her to be much more on par with Mandy, much more human. So how I see her now is she certainly still resonates for Mandy, what Mandy's going through. She's absolutely a support. She still has hope where Mandy might not have hope anymore, but it's not, again, the word buoyant comes to mind. It's not this very light hope. It's like, we're going to get through this, but it's going to be a lot of work, and I'm going to pull you, and you're going to have to come with me. It's determination. It is, she feels the struggle and her own struggle. She just is in a place where she perhaps can see the light, even if it's far away. She, or she at least believes that there's a way out of this. So that's a very different type of angel.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
And again, we talked about it, and I think Lori immediately understood and immediately changed her focus, her face, her body language started to shift almost immediately, which was beautiful to see. And again, I come to expect from these mature artists who I happily surround myself with. I say, yes, this is why I love working with you guys. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And you explained to me that you made certain other choreographic changes that interestingly both evolved from a sense of clarity and then further contributed to that clarity.
Yes.
If you want to share a couple, gave you a little cheat sheet
Yes.
here.
Yes. Arm gestures clear. Yeah, there were a couple moments that there were one or two. I would say that maybe there were holes, choreographic holes, places where I hadn't given the ladies quite as much to do as I would have wanted. And now with this sort of, again, everything I just described to you, suddenly we hit that point in the dance, and I was like, oh, you know what? Let me go ahead and give you what that material should be. And then again, now that we're sort of in this, we're all on a much richer plane, it was very easy to just kind of trust my body and create something that felt really true to where the piece is now. And that was really great. There's one particular moment where Mandy and Lori pull away from each other, and Mandy dances a solo, and Lori sort of fades into the background. And I had originally, at one point, just asked her to kneel and perhaps like pose her arms out in a tree-like way. And it felt a little stiff and artificial from choreographically. Lori danced it wonderfully, but and then at some point, like, that part even kind of, I don't know if it got forgotten or just kind of faded away, or I said, you know what, that's not making me happy, so why don't you just stand and watch Mandy dance. That's another way that she could address it, because again, she's witnessing what Mandy's going through. But today I was like, no, let's really clarify what this is going to be. So you're actually going to walk away. You're going to turn away from her, because you know what? Now it feels like you don't need to constantly keep watch on her. Like, you are connected to her. You know what's going on. So you can turn away. You can turn your eyes away from her, but still feel her. So I let that happen, which again, just from an aesthetic point of view, looks much more interesting. And then I was able to not just pose her, but move her into the poses in a way that made sense with the dance and all of the images that I've been sharing with you guys. And now her body's moving and is so much more tactile from everything we talked about, that we created this nice little gesture phrase and this tree-like shape evolved out of it. And I don't know, so it felt very organic, it felt very rich, and probably couldn't have happened on any other day, but it happened today.
Aren't we lucky?
Yeah.
And in fact, there are two other developments from today's rehearsal that I thought were worthy of note. And one is related to your very beautiful description of the different way you want the ladies to use their hands on their own bodies and on one another's bodies. So kind of along those lines of thinking, you spent a good deal of time with them in their entwined positions in what we have shared with our colleagues you call a conversation of gestures. Mm-hmm. And just sort of a little subtle difference from what you were saying before is that you wanted to make sure that when one of the two went to initiate the conversation, so to speak, that she put weight mm-hmm. behind that gesture, that movement that inevitably would cause the partner's body to respond in an organic, authentic yes. way, yeah. which in my mind represented this sort of natural cause and effect, back and forth nature of the conversation mm-hmm. that you're talking about, and really makes it substantive. And you found that created a situation where you felt the dialogue, if you will, was more meaningful. Yeah, we talked about not only the gesture itself and the person doing the gesture, but then we also talked about receiving the gesture, receiving the touch, and I said let's go ahead and have each touch have a response. Now again, that doesn't have to be a choreographic new thing. It's just allowing your body to feel what it is and move in a subtle way or in a more overt way. Have a physical response to it. So if I put my hand on my shoulder, I'm not going to just remain still. I'm going to let that shoulder move a little bit, mm-hmm. depress mm-hmm. a little bit, or depress and then maybe I swell up into it. So there's different responses we can have mm-hmm. to touch,
telling the ladies that I wanted that from them, giving them permission to do that, because we do it naturally too. It's almost harder to not do it sometimes, and to encourage them to think about, well, so what might that touch mean? What might that touch feel like? What emotional responses might that arouse? One, it's fun to consider all those things, but it really did make for a much richer moment in dance. Suddenly, and again, it's interesting talking about process. One might think that I would want to have that go that deep right away, but as we've talked before, I really wanted the architecture of the dance to be well defined first, because I feel like somehow if I had them moving in response to each other's touches as we're building the dance, I don't know, a whole other, maybe it would have been just as good, but a whole other choreographic conversation maybe would have come about. And this one to me is so interesting because the shapes, the negative space that the hands move through one to the next, to me is so interesting. And now we've imbued it with this real human quality, this real emotional quality. So we're getting both. And to me, that's really exciting.
And really so fascinating to watch, as we hope eventually you will be able to.
Yeah.
The other thing, John, I thought was very interesting, that you noted a definitive change in the way Mandy was approaching her dancing today, as well as the emotionality she was expressing. And I think you really liked what she was doing, and it gave you an idea of what you wanted to see moving forward that was a little bit different than what we've seen before.
Again, continuing with everything I've just described, I noticed that as Mandy was doing her solo within the dance, which I always had thought of as, I don't know, it's very angry, it's very aggressive, she's very frustrated, and I don't know if thrashing is the right word, but it's a lot of strong strokes of the arms and the legs. In a way, thrashing does kind of work to describe it. And I'm not sure what it was about today, why she did this, but as she was doing the solo today, she was very pensive. And sometimes dancers may just be pensive because they're thinking about the steps. It had been like 2 weeks since we'd done it, so she was maybe thinking about things. She could have also been thinking about how the notes I had given her earlier apply to the solo. But it looked more than that. It looked also like an emotional response to everything we had been working on, everything I just described. And so I kind of trusted that this was sort of a very purposeful thing she was exploring. And I really appreciated it. I really liked it, because this moment in the dance where I used to think of it as, very tense and aggressive, suddenly it became softer and more fluid. And I think when I mentioned it to you earlier, Sherry, I used the word ropey. I don't know if that's a word, but
it's
now. Not quite. It's sort of sinewy, but I don't know. It has a rope quality, and one might say, "Oh, okay. Well, no. In the dance, actually, your character needs to be way more anxious and thrashy at this point." But I didn't. And it looked to me like, oh, maybe in this solo moment she does become more quiet. She's already been sort of railing against Lori. You can imagine someone who's upset and being held by their friend, and that person's just pounding their fists against their friend, like they need someone to just pound against. so it kind of has that feeling, and then when Lori leaves, maybe instead of continuing to pound at the air, you don't have anybody to pound on anymore, maybe suddenly you go a little more quiet and a little more internal, and so seeing Mandy do that again, whether she was conscious of it or just exploring the movement or exploring an emotion, I'm not sure, but it really resonated with me. And I'm thinking, oh, I think maybe that's the direction I want to take that part in now. And so we're going to see at next rehearsal. I'm going to talk to her more about it and try it. I think it could be a very nice texture change,
Right.
and then she can build back up to it, to the more stronger dynamics later.
Well, what a great tutorial and process today.
Well, yeah.
If you really think about it. And on that note, I hope that you will continue to stay with us to see this piece evolve even more. And we've been discussing it for quite a long time, not during the summer hiatus, of course, but the qualitative detail work is so rich and can lead you in so many directions that we could probably do endless videocasts as we dig down into each detail. But I imagine that each week there will be further and further revelations that emerge organically from this process, and ultimately it will be what's right for the piece, what's right for the dancers, what's right for you. I have no doubt that is where we will be going.
Fingers
and
crossed.
we look forward to sharing that process with you and the way in which Jonathan responds emotionally to it. So thank you for being with us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.